Everybody, good morning. Good morning, everybody. If you can get your coffee and please take your seats. Merrick asked me to introduce our speaker today, so I will do that. Dr. William Valerio is the Patricia Van Berg Allison Director and CEO of the Woodmere Art Museum. As most of you know, the Woodmere is a small museum in Chestnut Hill and right here in our community, and it's dedicated to the artists and art of Philadelphia. Now, to be a museum director is similar to serving as a rector of a church in that the job requires that the person wear many hats. A museum director has to be an expert in art history as well as being able to handle the financial issues of running the business of the museum. Dr. Valerio attended Williams College, graduating cum laude. He earned an MA in art history at the University of Pennsylvania and a PhD in art history at Yale. After working for 6 years as a curator, he attended the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, earning his MBA in 2004. Since 2010, he's led the Woodmere to triple its attendance. And he offers there a wide range of temporary exhibitions. If you haven't been to the Woodmere, you should go. It's truly a gem right here in our own community. And when you go, don't miss the holding in the permanent collection. They have a painting by Frederick Church entitled Sunset in the Berkshire Hills from 1857. And it's truly a masterpiece of 19th century American landscape painting. Dr. Valerio's talk today is entitled The Magic of Tiffany and the Tiffany Window at St. Thomas. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Bill Valerio.
It is an enormous pleasure for me to be here today for many reasons, and it's a special pleasure to be introduced by Jim. Jim and I go way back. Jim Weiss and I attended the University of Pennsylvania together in the art history department back in 1985, right? Is that when we were there together? 85, 86, 86, 87, something like that? Yeah, so we've been friends for a long time. We lost touch a little bit, and then I distinctly remember bumping into you in the PMA one day and say, hey, what are you doing here? And we've been in touch since then, which has been really nice. And when Marek said that Jim would introduce me, it made it even a little bit more special to be here. So thank you, Jim. I'm going to talk today about the John R. Fell window, a window made by Louis Comfort Tiffany for St. Thomas, sometime probably in the first decade of the 20th century. And it's a special window. In Philadelphia, there are about 5 or 6 places where you can see great works of art by Tiffany in public institutions. One of them is right here at St. Thomas. One is the Curtis Building's, the Curtis Building's Magic Garden mosaic. I'm sure a lot of you have been to the Curtis Building to see the garden mural, which is astonishing. There are, by my count, and I've done a little bit of research just, on Google, there are 4 other Tiffany windows in churches in Philadelphia, plus this one. So it's one of a small group of Tiffany windows here. It's very special for that reason. And what I wanted to talk about today is just what is special about Tiffany windows in general, and what is special about this specific window. So let's see, I think I advanced this way. So this is a memorial window for a man named John R. Fell. You can see at the very bottom of the window, there's a dedication, John R. Fell, born January 1st, 1858, so he was a New Year's baby. And he died November 15th, 1895. He was 37 years old, a young man, even by the standards of the day. And I have to believe that members of his family, and it's a distinguished family, and I know there are members of the Fell family still connected to St. Thomas today. And it would be interesting to know more about John R. Fell in relation to this window. But he was a young man. It's certainly a window that's not made after the First World War. There are stylistic changes that happen in Tiffany's art after 1914, 1918, and into the 20s, where we'd be able to see it in the window if it was a window of that period. So I'm assuming it's a window that was made between the time that John R. Fell died and sometime in the early years of the second decade of the 20th century. And my understanding is, and here's an area where a little more information would be interesting to know, and I bet we could do the research in the archives of the church. The church as we know it today, the magnificent church, was consecrated in 1881. So St. Thomas goes back to the 17th century, and there have been many churches on the site. This particular church, the church that we know and love today, was consecrated in 1881. So by the time the young Mr. Fell passes away, the church is a young church. He and his family have seen the construction take place, and I have to imagine that there were opportunities for windows to be created, and the family went to Louis Comfort Tiffany and the Tiffany Studios in New York. The Tiffany Studios were located in Corona Park in Queens, and I'll talk more about that later. I want to introduce Tiffany himself. There's a photograph that I love of Tiffany. It was a carte de visite photograph of Tiffany when I'm guessing he's about 25 years old. Tiffany lived from 1848 to 1933, so his life encompassed that of John R. Fell. And I have three images here that, to me, in this column on the right, three images that represent, to me, three important things about Tiffany that I think are important to remember about him as a person and as an artist. And the first one, up at the top, you see his father. His father is the man in the top hat. His father was Charles Louis Tiffany, who founded Tiffany and Company, the store that we all know with the blue box and the white ribbon. His father grew up in Connecticut, worked in grocery stores and things like that, retail of other kinds, and first with a few partners and then on his own, created the store that we know on Fifth Avenue today. That's not the original site, but you see the interior of the store there. And Tiffany and Company always stood for luxury brands. One of the things that made the store so famous was they introduced the idea of sterling silver, pure silver. That started with Tiffany and Company, and every product that they offered had that level of highest quality, highest level of luxury. And what's important to know is that Tiffany Jr., so Louis Comfort Tiffany, the glass artist that we're talking about today, learned entrepreneurship, learned what it meant to run a business from his father, and it was his father's investment, his father's capital, that helped Tiffany build his business in the first place. He didn't have to go looking for venture capitalists. He had a dad who believed in him and supported his business. So Tiffany is coming from a tradition of American business culture, and as I speak today, we'll see that is a big part of everything that he does. The second photograph in the center is Pennsylvania Military Academy. Tiffany was born in 1848, so he was about 15 years old when the Civil War began. And do I have that wrong? I mean, Civil War, 1861. 61 to 65. Louis Comfort Tiffany, the child of a distinguished family of New York, should have gone to a prestigious school in the liberal arts, but he did not. He was sent to military academies. I'm forgetting the name of the first school that he attended. It was in Montclair, New Jersey, and it closed down because all of his professors went to fight in the Civil War. And he transferred then to Pennsylvania Military Academy, which was in Chester County, just a little bit north of Wilmington, almost near the Delaware border. But the Civil War is a driving element in Tiffany's life. And I'm just offering that as a teaser now because I'll talk about that more and how I believe that relates to this particular window and to a big part of his output overall. That Tiffany is very much a child of the Civil War. And then on the bottom, I'm showing, believe it or not, a watercolor of the White House. In 1882, Tiffany got his big break when President Arthur, Chester Alan Arthur, hired the young Tiffany, who was just getting his businesses off the ground. In 1882, President Arthur hired Tiffany to redo the White House. And you can see here a series of glass panel doors that are described as having been magnificent beyond anything people had seen. People came from around the world, of course, to go to the White House, and this established Tiffany's reputation of being the best in class, that his glass was the best glass. The President of the United States described it as that. And from 1882 onwards, Tiffany rode this wave of being known as the best of what this entire industry of interior design and specifically glass windows, glass objects, of what glass had to offer. And the White House was redecorated by Teddy Roosevelt sometime in the first decade of the 20th century. So it was only for about 25 years that the White House lost its kind of federal appearance, became this incredible Tiffany Art Nouveau, arts and crafts style, opulent, slightly Victorian-looking interior. And it was Roosevelt who really felt it needed to be federal style again.
Were those windows, those doors preserved? Were they lost?
I believe they're lost. They could have been recycled. I mean, Tiffany was a good recycler, so it may be that when they were taken down, he reclaimed them and used the glass again. And we know he did that on other occasions, but I don't really know the answer to that question. Ah. Ah, that's a painful story, right? Yeah. Well, this is good. So parts of it exists. It would be an interesting exhibition, right? Tiffany's White House. If we could bring the parts together, that would be good. That's how museum directors think. Like, people start putting these things out there. Aha, could we borrow those? Be cool. I wanted to talk a little bit about my own relationship to Tiffany, and many of you know me from Woodmere, where our mission is to celebrate the artists of Philadelphia. Some of you know me from my years at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which is a big international museum. But my first job, after I completed my PhD in art history, was at the Queen's Museum, and I'm showing the Queen's Museum there on the bottom. It's right next to the big Unisphere from the 1963 World's Fair, and a big part of the collection of the Queen's Museum is art and design related to the World's Fair. It's a wonderful modernist collection of design. It also has a great collection of Tiffany, and there's a reason for that. The great collector of Tiffany of the middle and late decades of the 20th century, Egon Neustadt, lived in Queens, and he was an immigrant to the United States from Vienna. He started collecting Tiffany in the 20s and 30s and saved every receipt and every little note that he scrawled on a piece of paper and put into his wallet. And so he was buying Tiffany lamps for $12.50 at garage sales, and he amassed an enormous collection of Tiffany's lamps, his windows, his objects, his desk sets. And Egon Neustadt lived in Queens. He lived in Corona Park, which was where the Tiffany studios were located. And I'm showing a slide of the Tiffany studios from, I want to say one of the late decades of the 19th century. The building was rebuilt a few times, but you see it has a lot of smokestacks because it was full of furnaces for melting glass. And this was in Corona Park, Queens. And Tiffany built his studio there because he wanted to be out of the visibility of Manhattan and all the people who were his competitors in interior design. So he built his studio in Queens. And one of the things that Egon Neustadt did was in the mid-years of the 1930s, he purchased the contents of Tiffany's studio. He purchased the bins upon bins upon bins of raw Tiffany glass. And I'm showing you here a slide from the storage room at the Queen's Museum, where a good part of the Neustadt collection is stored, where some of the highlights from the collection are on display. The Neustadt Museum is its own entity that is not a public-facing entity. It's a private entity, and you can make an appointment to go there. But the public-facing part of the Neustadt Museum is at the Queen's Museum, and a portion of the storage is there. And this is what the storage looks like for the Tiffany glass that Egon Neustadt purchased when the Tiffany studios closed after the death of Louis Comfort Tiffany in 1933. So it was only a few years after Tiffany's death that Neustadt bought the contents of the studio, and it's an amazing thing that he did that and has preserved all of this glass. Over the decades, it's been sorted through by color, and you can kind of see it's almost like there are different mailbox slots for each color glass. And what I love about this photograph is you can see 3 individual sheets of glass to give you a sense of what Tiffany glass looks like when it's first made. And typically a sheet of glass might be 18 by 24 inches, something like that. Sometimes a little bigger, sometimes a little smaller. It varies. And this is really the source of the magic of Tiffany. It's the glass itself. I'm going to show a slide now of another window in St. Thomas. This is just a little detail from another beautiful window, but you can see that the stained glass is flat and it's painted on, right? And so it's a beautiful figure of a female saint. I'm showing a detail of her foot and the drapery on her calf, and an artist has painted that. And the pieces of glass are fairly geometric, simple shapes are adhered to, and that's how the window is put together. It's stylized in a somewhat pre-Raphaelite way, so I chose this one because this is a window contemporary to Tiffany, but this is how stained glass windows have been made for centuries and centuries and centuries. clear glass that's painted, faceted with, and placed into designs with lead channels. And that's how this window is made. That's how the windows of Chartres Cathedral are made. It hadn't changed. Tiffany changed that and made glass like this, glass that is actually a sculpture. He started out inspired by an artist named John Lafarge, who was also making opalescent glass, and this we would categorize as opalescent drapery glass. It's the kind of glass that Tiffany would make specifically for drapery on figures and church windows. But you can see that, you know, although the overall tonality here of the raw glass is white, that it pools in ways such that you can see that there are different colors in the glass. Tiffany started out by just taking commercial pieces of glass and mixing them into his vats to see what kind of effects he could get. He was a great experimenter. He was never satisfied with just the normal. And throughout his career, he developed ways to make all different kinds of glass. Drapery glass, you can see here, here's a full sheet. If he had a design for a window like the window here at St. Thomas, he had people who he trained in his studio who would look at this piece of drapery glass and say, aha, the way that this angel's drape falls, we need that specific piece like right at the center. And it was a matter of looking at this glass, which is organic and free form, and figuring out which piece works to give dimension to the image that he wants to create. And the way that this glass would be made was Tiffany trained people not only to mix the vats of raw molten glass. So glass is made out of granite, I think it's called silica. It's a sort of sand made out of granite stone. It's mixed with other things to stabilize it, and Tiffany would put other minerals in it, as glassmakers have done for centuries and centuries, to get different color effects. And Tiffany actually trained people how to dump out the big vats of glass and kind of shake it as it's being poured out to get these ripples to create the drapery glass. He also invented tools, rollers and other things that could be used to kind of push around the molten glass or even get stuck sometimes to the glass and kind of pull it up and create ridges in the glass. Here are some other types of Tiffany glass, and when we categorize Tiffany glass, there are names for these things. So, and I always forget the names, but on the bottom left, let me get my pointer. This here is ripple glass, and ripple glass is related to drapery glass, except the ripples are more regular and they're smaller mountains and valleys. Tiffany would often use this kind of glass for water, like if there's a stained glass scene with water in it, he would use it for that. And we'll see how he uses it in the St. Thomas window. I have my notes on the different names of glasses. Streamer glass. This is an example of streamer glass. So you can see it's opalescent glass, like the white glass that I just showed, that has different colors melted into the glass to create variation in the glass. And then he's invented little squirt machines that would squirt streams of glass of other colors onto the top of the glass as it's drying, and he had different ways of making sure that the streamer of the darker colors were, embedded into the sheet of glass. He would often use this kind of glass, say, for showing the branches of trees in, say, for example, a landscape window. This is fracture glass. Sometimes it's called confetti glass, and Tiffany would have people trained to blow balloons of very thin glass. And when the glass was the right thickness, the balloon of glass would be popped so that it would break into a million different pieces and fall onto the molten glass, and the pieces of these little fragments of glass would embed in the glass. And he would sometimes use this kind of glass, for example, to show light coming through trees or leaves on a tree in the back of a window that's a landscape. This piece of glass I found online, to me, looks like a combination of these two. You can see the fracture and you can see the streamer in this blue and green kind of watery piece of glass. And Tiffany was constantly experimenting in this way. I talked about the ripple glass, and this dappled effect is a type of glass that's created by Tiffany just by in the molten process adding different mineral contents that react to heat in different ways, and so melt at different temperatures, and so never fully integrate into the glass. So they create this dappled kind of pattern. One of the really interesting things about Tiffany is he kept his formulas for all these colors in his head, never wrote it down. He was so competitive with other firms that made windows and made stained glass that he had bad experiences with lawsuits and patent suits in his early years. So he never wrote down his formulas for the different colors of glass that he made. So when he died, it went with him, which is so interesting. Oh, I can't advance with this. So I wanted to start talking about the window here at St. Thomas. And it's a window with beautiful glass. Tiffany, connoisseurs of Tiffany look at the individual pieces of glass and they say, wow, that is a beautiful piece of glass. And so here, for example, look at this piece of glass here. There's the foot of the angel. Let's see, let me go back and let me remind everybody what the window looks like, right? So here's our window. I'm showing this lower section here. There's an angel holding a scroll, other angels, cherubs up in the heavens, and then a cloudy peak. So I'm showing first this bottom section of the window, which is packed with beautiful glass. And Tiffany is no dummy. He's putting his best glass at eye level. He wants you to see it. And these are spectacular pieces of glass. Look at the light. And I just came to the church on Friday at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and took these photographs with my telephone camera. So there's no goosing or Photoshop or, these are the colors. These are the colors translated into a projection. But this is pretty spectacular glass. And one of the things that's very special about this window is the color scheme for it. So I talked about how glass is made in vats, and the color is determined by different minerals being mixed with, the silica granite that the glass is made out of. Does anybody know which metallic element, which mineral is used to make purple glass? Does anybody know? Gold. This window is dripping with gold. This was an expensive window. This is a top-of-the-line window with some of the fanciest glass that Tiffany made. So, like, you would use copper, mostly copper oxides and different coppers to make green and amber, glass, which is kind of typical of Tiffany. The purple glass and the deep red glass is all made with gold. So this is a fancy window. This really is, and you can see it right away. And I think Tiffany wants us to see it right away, because if you're standing in the church, this is what you see first at eye level. the other thing that's really interesting about Tiffany, and this gets away from the conversation about glass for a second, is that he patented a way of constructing his windows by wrapping each section of glass with copper foil and then soldering the copper foil to the lead casing. So he was no longer being restricted by channels of lead. He invented a soldering process that allowed him to get the enormous complexity of forms and shapes in the design of a window, and nobody had been able to do this before. Remember that other section of the window that I showed earlier and described as vaguely pre-Raphaelite, and there were big square sections of glass fit into lead channels. Tiffany liberated the art of stained glass from that by inventing this new method of foiling and then soldering, and it changed stained glass forever. And I just wanted to show the angel's wing. You can see that, he's using ripple glass on those feathers of the angel's wing. You can see the ripples and how, the artist, there were people in the studio whose job was simply to select the right section for the right pattern. There were other people who were trained to do the soldering, and Tiffany really thought of the soldering as the line. It gets heavier, it gets lighter, it has an energy to it that, it's like, the element of line in a great painting. And that was a result of this invention of using the gold foil in the structure, using the copper foil in the structure of the windows. And I think you can see it really well in this detail, how the line of the solder that's holding the window solid, has an energy and a life unto itself. There are other spectacular pieces of glass in the window, and I'm showing here the leg of the angel is this piece of glass that is green into pink into amber. And I've put a square here. I'm talking about this tall and thin piece of glass here, and I'm showing a detail of it. It's a beautiful sculptural piece of, individual piece of glass. There's a crossbar across the front that bisects it, and those crossbars give strength to the window, keep it sturdy. But the other really interesting thing, and this is something that Tiffany does in ways that I don't think anybody else does, is he's building his window in layers. So now I'm showing that same section of glass from the back. I went outside and got behind the window, and I'm showing the same section. So here's that piece of glass from the front, and here's that piece of glass from the back. And what's so interesting about it, when you look at this piece of glass from the back, or actually when you look at this section from the back, because this is actually a different piece of glass than this. This piece of glass is beautifully sculptural and round, and it's layered with different colors. This piece of glass is dark in the center and light on the sides, and that creates the illusion on the front of a three-dimensional object. So Tiffany's windows are built in layers. They're not flat. They are not a single layer of glass. They're 2 layers of glass. Sometimes there are 3 layers of glass, and maybe even more than that. But it's this thinking of the window as a three-dimensional object and thinking about the way light passes through the glass in order to create the illusion that you see on the front. That's a big part, to me at least, of the magic of Tiffany's windows, so that you accept when you see this, this section here of the angel's legs, that it is actually a physical object. It's a leg pushing up through drapery. And part of what makes it seem so dimensional is not only the shape of the glass in the front and the color, but the way that light passes through the piece of glass that backs it up on the outside. And so it's so interesting with a Tiffany window to be able to see the front and the back together. Here's another really interesting little passage of glass in your window. So here's a triangular piece of kind of pink and red glass that looks as if the garment of the angel has kind of flipped open a little bit, and we're seeing a peek of the underside of the cloak. And Tiffany has made it bright pink and bright red. And what's interesting to me, and I went, because this was a piece of glass that stood out to me, and that's one way to think about Tiffany windows. You can say, wow, that's a beautiful passage. That's an individual, beautiful piece of glass. So here, you can go to the back and say, well, what's behind this piece of red glass in the front? And it's a piece of fractured glass. Remember, I showed you the glass that has the little fragments in it of different colors, and he's done that so that light will be dappled as it comes through and create this miraculous effect of a passage where light is uneven and is creating this this dimension to this object here, but you don't see the fracture on the front, but if you go to the back, and I encourage everybody to go look at the back of the window, you see this terrific piece of glass there. The banner is no surprise. The banner, and here I'm showing the banner, and here's the back of the banner. There are vertical striations in the banner to give the banner dimension as an unfurling, like a ribbon. And I wanted to read what the banner says. Tiffany did not just make angels and select some text to slap on it in a haphazard way. He was very thoughtful. And each of his windows, to me at least, has a different message. So if you look, from the top, and you see in this detail a bottom of the word justified, what it says on this window is, or on this banner, being justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. That's what it says on the banner. That's the message of the angel. And you can see, and I think this is another really beautiful passage, the angel, the scroll comes down from above, it ends here. The angel who's down below in our realm is holding a piece, a new piece of the banner in the angel's hand, and it scrolls around. You see the back of the banner, then the front of the banner. But the action here is that this is the statement that the angel is making. And when I think of that, and I think about, what does it mean to be a person of faith? It's to be a person of faith, this is my interpretation, but to be a person of faith, you live in the manner of God. You live in the manner of Jesus Christ if you're a Christian. And by living in that way, you live at peace. You live at peace with God. You live at peace with the universe. That's, to me, what it means to be a person of faith. And that's the message, to me at least, that's the message of this window. And the beauty of the glass and the beauty of the window have everything to do with the beauty of this message. And that's, to me, a big part of what Tiffany's about. And he was an artist who, as part of an art movement that's very broad in America called the American Renaissance, looking back at the Renaissance and looking back at other historical periods, the Middle Ages too, sought to bring art into the modern age that was spiritual. Tiffany, all of these artists, Tiffany lived through the Civil War. America had almost destroyed itself, and a big goal of the American Renaissance was to bring spirituality through art back into people's lives. And that's the message also that I get from this message, from this window, from Tiffany. It's also, and this is a little bit of an advertisement, it's also one of the main messages of the artist Violet Oakley. And some of you will know that Woodmere is working right now to organize a big Violet Oakley exhibition in the fall that I hope you'll all come see. But Violet Oakley and Tiffany were both part of this movement to bring a morality that comes from faith into people's lives as a correction to an American society, to an American political situation that had almost just destroyed itself and had destroyed, entire generations of people, especially men. I wanted to show you one other little feature of Tiffany, and that is Tiffany Jewels. Tiffany's father was a jewelry maker. We talked about him a little bit before. Tiffany incorporated into his designs little beads of glass that he called jewels. They're Tiffany Jewels. One of the Tiffany items that's most covered in jewels is the famous dragonfly lamp. Some of you may know it. It became famous at the turn of the century. It won gold medals at the Paris Universal Exhibition. It was made in the Tiffany studio. It was designed by a woman named Clara Driscoll, and here's a picture of Clara Driscoll in the Tiffany studios. Here's the whole dragonfly lamp. You can see that the eyes of the dragonfly are red jewels, and there are green jewels on top of the green foliage above that look like drops of water on top of the green foliage. And Tiffany put 2 jewels in the window here in St. Thomas, and they're very subtle, but they're very special, and it's something that I think are worth knowing that they're there so that you can go look at them. There's one here, almost as if it's a button or a pin holding the garment together up above, and there's a second jewel right there. Tiffany rarely used jewels in this kind of over-the-top opulent way, but the dragonfly lamp is an over-the-top opulent object for people's homes. In the windows, he used them from time to time, and there are 2 of them here. I thought it's good to know that. And then the last thing that I would say is that there's a little gardening that I think needs to be done at St. Thomas. And the reason I say that is because I already told you that I climbed into the garden to take pictures of the back of the window, but there's a big American holly bush that was just planted right behind the window, and it's going to block all the light. So, I mean, it's a young. I love American hollies. They're good. They're native. They support the local birds and the bees. But I think we should find a new place for it, because as this gets big, it's going to block all, and it is already blocking some of the light that's hitting the window. So I think that's a minor thing. I don't think Marek will mind that I'm saying there's a little gardening chore to be done. But I wanted to end there with a full view of the window and take any questions. Hi. Yeah, it's hard.
My question is, how was he able to get such intricate pieces? Did he mold them custom, or was he able to cut this glass? And how would you cut a rippled piece of glass accurately?
Yeah, so the back of the glass is flat. My understanding is it would be scored, with a diamond cutter, glass cutter, just like the kinds of tools that we still use. And it would be tapped, and so the cutting was done from behind, and it's a very basic process, and yet Tiffany had very high standards, so the people who did it really knew how to do it, and they knew how to work with the pressure of that little diamond wheel to not destroy the glass. Although I'm sure a lot of glass went in the bin. No, I mean, as far as I understand, the general way that it was made was these sheets, these kind of rectangular sheets would be made, and then parts would be cut out for specific designs and specific windows, and then the sheet would be saved, and so it would start as a rectangle, it would end up being an irregular shape. Yeah. Hi. Those are painted, and there were people in the studio that did painting. I mean, Tiffany really wanted to create the image out of the glass, but there were some places where painting was necessary, and he had people who were hired as painters, and it was a kind of paint glaze that would then be baked onto the glass. So it would then go back into the oven so that the glaze or the paint does become embedded in the surface of the glass. Hi. Oh gosh, yes. I mean, he won gold medals at the Chicago World's Fair, the Paris World's Fair. He was incredibly successful in his lifetime. In the post-World War I world, when modern art really swept through American and European culture, Tiffany fell out of favor. And I want to say that probably in 1933, he died, feeling a sense of disappointment at the direction that art had gone in America. That he was not the crest of the wave anymore by the time we got to the 1930s. That was common, by the way, for the Pennsylvania Impressionists, like we here in at Woodmere, for example. We have a great collection of Redfield and Schofield. And these were the guys who were winning all the big medals in the international exhibitions of the arts in San Francisco and Chicago, in Paris. One of Schofield's big paintings is bought by the French government for the Louvre. And these are big honors for American artists. By the time you get to the 1920s, the interest in the traditional arts of the pre-World War I era has given way, has changed, and we're really looking at this new language of modern art. And I have to think that like Violet Oakley, like Redfield, like Schofield, Tiffany was really struggling with the way culture was going in America. Yeah. Yeah. Patterns change, borders change, shapes change. I see echoes of Art Deco in the Tiffany of the 1920s. Designs change. Hi. Yeah. It was painted. I'm sorry, and I didn't hear the second. Yes, it would be baked in to make it permanent. So that it. I mean, you've probably had the experience where you paint on top of a really shiny surface, and after a while it starts to deteriorate or it flakes off. It's in general. I mean, it's called stained glass because minerals embed into the actual glass. And so that idea of staining is that it's kind of baked in. Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's a centerpiece. That's a centerpiece element. I agree with that. Jim? Oh, Louis Comfort Tiffany. Yeah. Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I mean, did Tiffany think about that? Yes, absolutely. That a great window like this, it almost functions like a living, breathing work of art, and it changes seasonally as the position of the sun changes. It changes, from morning to afternoon, absolutely. And Tiffany is thinking about that. In terms of did he test it? I believe he did. You know, I mean, he was an experimenter. I mean, to me, that it's kind of almost one of the foundations of his entrepreneurship was always trying new things, and I have to think that, you know, for important commissions, you know, he would test out how the light would work or what would the position be. I'm guessing that the window was in place. I mean, the building was consecrated in 1881. There was a window there. Maybe it was an empty window, or, you know, just a clean window, and, you know, he was given the job of fill that window. But absolutely, I mean, the window changes from hour to hour. Julie? Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to be totally honest and admit that I, you know, did not have time to come to the church and dig into the archives. But it would be interesting to know. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it would be a big contribution to the scholarship on Tiffany for this information, you know, just to be available on the St. Thomas website, for example. And, you know, we all have websites now, and that's a great place for information to be accessible. And it would be great, again, and I mean, I was just wondering if there are any members of the Fell family here today. I mean, I know there are members of the family that are part of the congregation. I just don't know if anybody's here. But it'd be wonderful and also of interest if there are family stories and oral histories that would help, you know, flesh out the circumstances under which the window was made. Like, I mean, I'm going to just be honest. I did all the research that I could online last night at 11 o'clock and at 6 o'clock this morning. But I couldn't find much about John R. Fell online, and it would be good to know who he was, what his life was about, and why the family thought that to honor him in this way was the right thing to do. I'm sure there's something there, and it would be interesting to know. And to have a little page on the St. Thomas website, you know, could be an easy way to make that information accessible to people. Yeah.
What other products beyond church windows, windows generally, and lamps did that studio produce? I know there was some other.
Sure. Well, it was a full-service interior design business, and over time, it came to focus more and more on glass. But furniture, carpeting, design of a you know, a gracious home. Tiffany designed window grills. The window grills at the Philadelphia Museum of Art are designed by Tiffany, for example. So he designed metalwork for important buildings. There are beautiful Tiffany desk sets, bronze desk sets that Tiffany made that were very popular. And so it was, you know, your blotter with these flat designs that hold the piece of felt flat, ink wells, and a place to put your stamps, and a place, you know, little boxes for your envelopes and different sizes of stationery. And they're very beautiful, and they're very collectible. There are the lamps, of course. And the window? Yeah. Yes. In answer to the question, yes. There's a lot. It's a big world, Tiffany. And we haven't talked about mosaics. But, you know, Tiffany's mosaics are beautiful, and those are, you know, that's art made out of glass, but light is not passing through it, as in a window. It's, you know, bouncing off the surface, and he's using iridescent glass to make a lot of those mosaics. Those should be. Yeah, I want to take somebody who hasn't asked a question. Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, I mean, Tiffany windows do come up at auctions. There are examples of churches that have sold their windows in order to undertake transformative capital projects. Yeah. Gosh, I don't know. I honestly don't know the answer to that. There's recently a big sale at Sotheby's, and there are a couple of windows in it, and we would have to go on the Sotheby's website to check what things actually went for. I mean, there will be market information. Wow. Yeah. Right. Yeah. 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 Hi. Well, there are different kinds of policies that different institutions have that are umbrellas for the entire institution. And I'm guessing that there's an umbrella insurance policy for St. Thomas that would, cover this window. I mean, if there were a devastating fire and it were destroyed, could you replace it? I would say it's irreplaceable, but you probably, over time might be able to find, something else by Tiffany to replace it with, if something were to come on the market. I mean, you just want to take care of this and make sure nothing bad happens. Yeah, I know you've been wanting to ask it.
Unbiased, expert, artistic observer. In your opinion, do you think that we light the interior of the church too highly, and does that remove from the beauty of the light coming through the stained glass?
No, that's an interesting question. Oh, so is the interior of St. Thomas, is it too brightly lighted, and does the bright light take away from the light coming through the window? And I've got to say, I think that this window can take a lot of different circumstances, and we talked about different light effects. I mean, I walked into St. Thomas at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday, and the window was glorious. It was absolutely glorious. And I do remember sitting at a service at St. Thomas and just marveling at the beauty of the window and saying, wow, that's a Tiffany window here. I mean, I didn't realize it the first time I came to St. Thomas that there was a Tiffany window. So I think that the window is magical, and you could experiment with it, and see what light levels you need and what makes the window look good. Yeah. Hi. Huh. So the question was, did Tiffany have stock designs for windows? And, Jim, maybe you know the answer to this. I'm going to guess and say the answer is no. I think Tiffany is a one-of-a-kind artist. Interesting. Yeah, that's not a stock window. And what I wanted to say is, I did spend a little bit of time online looking at angel windows by Tiffany all across the United States. So there are a lot of angel windows that are similar in format in terms of a major figure of an angel with big wings and draped with beautiful drapery. I saw nothing that I would say is close to being like this in color. There are angels with trumpets, there are angels holding lilies, there are angels doing all different kinds of things, but this is the only angel window that I could find, looking at about 100, there was nothing I could find that was like that. Yeah. Yes, there are sketches by Tiffany. And by people in his shop. And so it was a big machine. And there were people who were designers, and there were people who were glass cutters, and there were people who handled the melting of the glass. And yes, there are works on paper that show designs. Thank you. Thank you so much. This was a real pleasure.